Good morning, sixth graders. Today's lesson is for April the 3rd, and we are starting a new chapter today on ancient Japan. Okay, ancient Japan is a very interesting country, and speaking of, I'm going to put in a link in our sixth grade page where it talks about, the song, How Great Is Our God, in the Japanese language. We've been doing that all year, and so that will be in there. So look for that and watch it if you'd like. All right, so you are going to be on pages 276 to 277 today. 276 to 277 today, and we're going to just briefly start an introduction. Today you would have had a test, but since we're not doing tests, I'm splitting up the first lesson. So if you look on your lesson plans, they may be a little bit different. Ignore your lesson plans from now on and just concentrate on the pages that I tell you in the beginning of the video lesson, all right? So if you haven't read it, go ahead and stop the video for a moment and read the first 2 pages, okay? Now, assuming that you read it, I want you to look at the focus. The focus is Japanese rose from seclusion to become a powerful nation. Japan was not open to trade until the early 1900s when Commodore Matthew Perry actually went out there and helped, well, the end of the 1900s. It was like towards the end of the 1800s, but was to open trade, and then Japan went from being a feudal society, which we'll talk about feudalism here, to a modern state where they adopted the Western world of, how they lived. Okay, so look at the timeline. You have the Yamato period, which was from 250 to 700. Then you have the Taika reforms, which was in approximately 645. The capital established at Nara, which is 710. And then you have the Heian period, which is 794 to 1185, right? All right. So remember, when you probably got to maybe 2nd or 3rd grade, you started to learn cursive, okay? Cursive, some kids don't learn cursive anymore, but in the Christian school, in our school, you are still learning cursive. Cursive is a beautiful way of writing. It's sad that people aren't doing it anymore. It's kind of like a lost art, but you guys are gonna be very smart because you guys know how to do it already. But anyway, Japan had a really, really interesting way of writing, and we're going to go ahead and talk about that. So hopefully you read that section where it talks about the writing, and I'm going to ask you some questions and kind of talk about it, okay? You talk about this little Japan, they like to use the rough material. We use the the soft notebook paper or loose leaf paper. We used to call it loose leaf paper, but notebook paper when we write, and it's smooth and soft and not bumpy. They liked the texture. It was kind of like sandpaper, kind of like writing on sandpaper. And so, Amanda, what does the chapter focus suggest about this chapter? If you've read this page, it's on the very top. I already talked about it. Although Japan was unnoticed for a while, it developed into a powerful nation, okay? And hopefully you read page 277, so I'm going to ask you some questions on that reading. What are some differences between how people learn to write today and how Mayu is learning? Let's see, Harmon, what do you think? You're smart. Mayu is learning a special style of writing that may take up to 20 years to master. Can you imagine, having to learn cursive for 20 years? That is not fun. I mean, I always like to practice my handwriting, and I try to improve it as I get older. I've always liked to do that, but sometimes I don't know about going to school for 20 years to learn it, though. What might be the reason the Japanese preferred rough paper? Let's see, Aiden, why do you think they preferred rough paper? Well, the uneven paper allowed for more expression and uniqueness of art. It would drive me crazy. I don't like having any bumpy things when I write. It has to be on a flat surface. And how are senses involved in practicing shodo? Remember, our senses are like sight, tastes, So, well, many people use 4 of the senses. They use smell because the ink was scented. When I was little, I used to love those markers that smelled really cool. I forget the name of them. And then touch was the textured paper. Hearing, remember, they had music in the background playing. Sometimes I like to listen to soft music, and when I'm studying or when I'm working, it's a little bit more lively. I have different playlists, like when I'm working out. I used to work out. I haven't listened to that playlist for a while. And when I have anxiety, I had when I was going to chemo, I had chemo's behind playlist. So they would listen to music in the background. Okay, and then sight, they had to worry about the ink strokes and make sure that it was perfect. So we're going to talk a little bit. Mayu, in the story, she is from a noble family. Sometimes the peasant children could also learn how to write well too, but there are certain things that would separate the peasants from the nobles. Now go back to the timeline, and it says, what 2 periods in Japan's history are shown on the timeline? Caleb. They are the Yamato period and the Heian period. Josiah, approximately how many years did the Yamato period last? I'll give you a second to figure that out. 450 years. And Hannah, how long did the Heian period last? Give you a sec. Do you have your calculator next to you? 391 years. 391 years, wow. Okay, so next page. Japan has some, first of all, Japan is an archipelago. Well, what's an archipelago? An archipelago is a group of islands, and Japan's name is a Chinese word, and they believed, this is crazy, they believed a goddess and a god dipped a jewel spear in the ocean, and out came all these islands, and that was the island of Japan, and all the people that lived there were Japanese, of course, all right, because that was their children. Their children are the Japanese people, and today some people still believe they are gods. But that's kind of a nice story, but it's kind of sad too because they're not gods. So we have Japan as an archipelago, and if you look at the pictures, Japan's name means origin of the sun. Today, Japan has a nickname, the land of the rising sun. That's why if you look at their flag, they have the white background and they have the red dot. And that dot represents the sun. So the land of the rising sun. Okay, and so at the left you look, why do the Japanese sometimes grow rice terraces? Okay, let's see. Well, what do you think? Let's see who I'm going to call on. Hannah, what do you think, sweetie? Not Hannah. Yeah, Hannah, I think I already asked you a question. I meant Gabby. Gabby, what do you think? Well, the Japanese probably used those terraces to plant rice because the mountains are difficult to cultivate. Okay, it's not like flat surfaces. Okay, and then look at above. Okay, Mount Fuji. Beautiful mountain. What might motivate people to hike to the summit of Mount Fuji? Well, just like any extreme sports person, they probably want to do it because Mount Fuji is Japan's highest summit, and that's like how people want to do Mount Everest, which can't even fathom why in the world would someone want to climb Mount Everest or Mount Fuji, because that's a volcano. Who wants to call not just a mountain, but a volcano. And then the Iroha Islands are a part of Japan's archipelago. So that's really kind of pretty there. We talked about the early history, about the god and goddess who stuck the jeweled spear into the ocean, Pacific Ocean, and Japan became Japan. Okay, the islands of Japan. So we have the 4 main islands of Japan. One of it's Hokkaido. It's the second largest of the 4 major islands of Japan. Honshu is, and usually I would show you pictures, but go ahead if you have time, Google these and you can just see what they look like, okay? Honshu is the largest of the 4 major islands of central Japan. Then you have Shikoku, which is the southern island of Japan, and Kyushu, which is the southernmost island of the major islands of Japan. All right, so let me ask you some questions before we go today. Why is Japan considered an archipelago? Archipelago. Well, if you look at the definition, I already told you, it's a large group of islands. Make sure I'm looking at you. And Japan is made of different islands. Okay? What kept Japan isolated from the rest of the world for a time? The Sea of Japan and the Pacific Ocean. It wasn't until later in modern days that President Millard Fillmore sent a man by the name of Commodore Matthew Perry to go to Japan to have them have an open trade, and that way they could, interact with other foreign nations. And Japan then, at that time, went from a feudal society, which we'll talk about, like I said, to a modern state, became adapting the Western way of civilization, and developed an amazing army. And you know that from World War I and World War II, how strong they were. Okay? Deceiving too. Did the Japanese keep written records of their history? No. You always read that they didn't. Just like other ancient civilizations that we discussed, they also did not do that. How was their history passed down to future generations? Well, remember when we talked about Africa, how they had the storyteller? Same thing, legend and myths. How do stories that your family talks about, you hear stories of your grandparents when they were little and things that they used to do, and then you kind of remember all those things. Okay? And then, how are the gods in this account similar to the gods of ancient civilizations? They have human characteristics, okay? How does the Japanese creation myth affect the beliefs of some Japanese people today? Well, they believe they're gods, right? Or they are descendants of gods. Now, tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about the region of Japan today. I'm splitting this lesson up into 2 lessons since you're not having a test. So don't necessarily pay attention to the lesson plans that I've written for you. They're a little messed up anyway. Just pay attention to the pages that I tell you when we open up for discussion, okay? And I'm hoping that you'll still send me your 3 things that you learned. If you want to research more in Japan, that's fine. Go ahead. I'm sure you have plenty of time. I miss you guys. I love you. And I hope you're making good choices.